the conflict, with the war in the Middle East between the United States and Iran. Israel is part of that war. And here is Donald Trump today is talking about that there is something going on. We are, negotiating all of it. It seems that he's trying to manipulate the market, and he feels that this way he can do something to influence the market. Because what we've heard from the Iranian officials, there was no direct and indirect talk in the last 24 days. So it's Donald Trump is making something up. But putting all these all these sort of political moves on the part of the Donald Trump aside, how do you see this situation? Yesterday we've learned about the two missiles getting to Damona and Arad. And what can we understand about the current situation with the air defense system, with the missiles, and the dynamic of the war?
Well, I think the air defense doesn't exist. I mean, it's a fiction. It's been a fiction from the beginning. Now they're talking about running out of interceptors, which I think is true. But the interceptors weren't doing a very good job to begin with. So right from the beginning, we really haven't seen any significant contributions from the missile defenses. Now, I want to be very circumspect. I apologize to the audience, but I think there is. Well, I have some very reliable information from Israel, and I think the situation there is, in my judgment, not very good. Which, of course, is important for people to understand, because the blackouts are the Israeli information control is, as far as I can tell, does nothing for the public in Israel, who is suffering, just as the public in Iran is suffering greatly. And these blackouts really conceal information from people who might, by reacting, have some constructive influence on the outcome of this, on the evolution of this terrible war, this war of choice, as most people point out. And, the indications are not changed with regard to Israel, in the sense that there's no question that significant damage is being done. It's not on the scale that is occurring in Tehran, but Israel is a smaller country, and disrupting it is a much less demanding job. And of course, the objective of Tehran is to disrupt Israel as best it can, and it seems to me it's succeeding very well. I mean, the air raid sirens are going off several times a night. People have no choice but to take shelter. This, of course, disrupts their whole family environments. In the case of some people, who have shelters, not everyone appears to have shelters, although I thought that was the case, but I've learned differently. And so people open their shelters to neighbors. People are sleeping on mats underground. Many people are homeless. They haven't been killed or injured, but they're homeless. There are many killed, there are many injured. Israel has a pretty good civil defense effort, which basically means taking shelter. That is fortunately saving lives, but the disruption to the society is tremendous. And that's a good effect from the point of view of the Iranian government, in terms of making the Israeli government take notice for what they are doing, for their unjust aggression toward Tehran. So, of course, as usual in war, or in many wars, the people in between populations of Iran and Israel are suffering the most. Obviously, I have had no contact with Iranians, but it seems to me it's worse in Iran, although it's a bigger country and it's somewhat more diluted. But killing all these people for no reason at all, not to mention schools and destroying schools and hospitals, and it's just unconscionable. But my concern at the moment has not been so much the air defenses, because it's important that people understand that these air defenses have never been functioning, because it's important to understand that this is a gigantic fraud that has been perpetrated by the US government and the Israeli government on American and Israeli citizens, not to mention Europeans who have paid enormous amounts of money for air defense systems that do not work against ballistic missiles. They do work against aircraft and drones. But that's another discussion. And of course, when they run out of interceptors, it means that the most problematic threat that the Israelis and others face now are the drones, because the drones are extremely accurate. They can be programmed from thousands of kilometers range. They have the ability to look at the targets prior to the final homing phase, and they essentially can run into the targets of interest. And we have seen that in the first day of the war. I mean, when the Iranians basically destroyed the entire base of missile defense radars in Israel. Now, from my point of view, speaking as a person who looks at it from a military point of view, that was the most important first step in a process where the Iranians are going about destroying all the air defense radars as well. There is no air defense. Without radars, you have no air defense. You can't shoot down drones. And those drones are, from the point of view of interceptor capabilities, relatively easy to hit. But if you don't have radars to observe the incoming drones and track them, those interceptors are useless. And we are now getting to a second phase where the Iranians are able to tear down the remnants of air defense being distinct from ballistic missile defense. And those air defense capabilities are critical because the drones are extraordinarily accurate. So the drones and cruise missiles will now begin to become the major inflictors of damage as things proceed. And in Dimona, we saw what looks like a couple of ballistic missiles with significant warheads on them come in and do damage. There's some nonsense about falling debris. There's no falling debris. These things came in, they were unengaged, or if they were engaged, there was some evidence. I've been very busy trying to do analysis. My problem is I can't follow the news and do analysis at the same time, and I'm trying to identify issues that the audience should be thinking about in the future, at least. And the issue I will talk mostly about now is the potential escalation to nuclear weapon use. Because to me, this is the gravest danger we now face, because Iran is now beginning to bring the full weight of its strike capabilities to bear on Israel and the military installations in the Persian Gulf. And this is going to do more and more and more damage, and it's going to cause more and more desperation in the Israeli and the US government. So we saw a very, I want to underscore, I don't take a lot of solace in this, but we saw a little bit of sense shown by Donald Trump when he stepped back from this unbelievably escalatory threat to destroy Iran's energy production system. And the Iranians basically told him what anybody could have told him. His advisors, I presume, told him this, that the Iranians are in a position to destroy the energy production facilities throughout the Middle East, which is what apparently the Iranians returned as a threat. And it's good that somebody was listening, somebody in the White, I presume it's the intelligence people who went to Trump, he obviously didn't listen to them initially, but basically said, you're going to have trouble like you have never seen before if you go ahead, because the Iranians will respond. They're in a war for survival, and they're not fooling around. They have reached the point where it's clear to them. I'm not speaking for the Iranians, but I'm speaking as a person who observed their situation. It's clear to them that they will get no relief of any kind unless they make it clear that if you don't give them some space, they're going to bring everything down with them. That's what they're saying, in a more polite way, but that's basically what they're saying. And I don't think they have a choice myself. I mean, in their position, I would do the same. I mean, they agreed to this joint comprehensive plan of action in 2015, which was an exceptionally constraining agreement, which I take as an indication that they really weren't ever trying to, well, maybe at some point earlier, they were thinking about building nuclear weapons, but there's no way they would have agreed to this joint comprehensive plan of action if they ever intended to have a nuclear weapon or wanted a nuclear weapon. Trump, of course, withdrew from the agreement, saying it was inadequate. There's no way that agreement was inadequate. It was a tremendously constraining agreement. Tremendous. I can talk about that sometime, but people are interested. But a tremendously constraining agreement. And it really, if people had followed the terms of that agreement, and those terms included relief for Iran, economic relief for Iran, which was not followed through as promised. If that had happened, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in today. So it all falls on Mr. Trump and his reckless behavior. Incidentally, a lot of it falls on Biden too, because when Biden took over after Trump had withdrawn from the agreement, he sat on his buttocks and did nothing to bring that agreement back in. The agreement should have gone in immediately. And Biden instead said, well, let's renegotiate it. Let's see if we can get something else out of this is the American negotiating attitude. This is all these extremist elements, many of them academics too, incidentally. My friends at Stanford, who I like to bring up, and completely misinformed about this, and not recognizing that when you reach an agreement, you have an agreement. If you and I agree if I agree to sell you an automobile, and you agree to pay a certain price, I can't come back to you later and say, well, I've decided you really should pay twice the price. I really think that's, something. That's not an agreement, and what diplomacy is no different from interactions between human beings. We have trust in each other. We understand the rules. We have implicit rules that we both come to a process. We come into the process with a certain common understanding of what the rules of engagement are. And when we reach an agreement, we stick by it. We don't just arbitrarily change it, or if we want to change it, we could. I could say, well, the car I'm selling you, I realized it's not as, I actually inadvertently misinformed you. It's really not in the same shape I thought it was in. I really should charge you less. That's what a fear agreement is about. We aim at building trust so that the next time we talk with each other and we have an agreement to make, we understand that both sides are aware and respect the interests of the other partner in the agreement. It's a partnership. These people don't behave that way. And they have destroyed the whole foundation of diplomacy, not only between Iran and the rest of the Western world, but also between Russia and China and the rest of the Western world. So we've got a lot of building to do, we being the American government. And if there's a new government at some point, we don't need another Biden replacement. We need people who go in and say, we realize this situation is unacceptable, has been unacceptable, and we are going to demonstrate that we understand what an agreement is and we understand how to keep the terms, make an agreement with good faith, and instead of taking all this, we got to take advantage. No, the agreement has to meet the needs of the different parties involved. And both parties have to understand that there are needs that each party has and make compromises that are compatible with their own needs, and then in good faith follow through. That's the way an agreement runs. You can't say, now I have an ability to screw them on this. It doesn't work that way. If it works that way, you're going to be in the situation the United States is now in. Nobody trusts you, and nobody should trust you. So that's the situation we're in. Now, what I'd like to talk about now is the grave danger we have of an escalation to nuclear war. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very dim ray of light in the Trump backing away from this absolutely crazy and outrageous threat he made against the Iranians, and understanding that they meant business. But what is of concern to me, and I hope, and I think it will be to your audience as well, because everybody's trying to understand what's going on, and war is fundamentally unpredictable, is as this conflict evolves, the situation of both sides is going to be changing. And the Iranian leverage is going to be increasing. It seems that way. I was not sure of this initially, incidentally. I was skeptical that Iran could do the tremendous levels of damage with ballistic missiles that they're now achieving. Part of that, I might say, has to do with the estimated accuracy of their ballistic missiles, which I talked about on several occasions. In the earliest attacks, the accuracy of those missiles were less. They were not as accurate as the missiles we're now seeing. Now, I had no way of knowing. I mean, I was suspicious of this, that they were using older missiles. And the purpose they had in mind was to cause the Israelis to use up their interceptors on the older missiles, which were not very effective to begin with because many of them were breaking up at high altitudes. Many of the warheads went to ground and clearly did not explode. You could see that there were no flashes on the horizons in many cases. So those warheads were not as reliable as the warheads on the more modern ballistic missiles, which are re-entering on more stable trajectories. So we're now beginning to see a shift. Now, what we don't know, but we can make a pretty reasonable guess about, is how many of these more modern ballistic missiles the Iranians have. Well, we don't know. But we also don't know how many modern drones the Iranians have. And we can bet, in the case of the drones, that there are a boatload of these drones, that the drones are more numerous in significant numbers relative to the ballistic missiles. They're just so much less expensive to make. They're so much easier to manufacture. The base for manufacturing them is available elsewhere. I mean, China can manufacture these things at a fantastic rate. We don't know how much help the Chinese will choose to give the Iranians, and they may well be doing it or will do it. The Russians are the same. These Shahad type drones, or which the Russians, I guess, call Jiran drones, are very similar, easily modified if transferred from one country to the other for special purposes. The technologies are all interchangeable and compatible. They're universal. And this drone war can go on for a very long time. And without air defenses, the weight of capability inevitably goes to the Iranians. So I'm guessing, again, it's a guess, that we will continue to see large amounts of damage from ballistic missiles, no question. But I think the significant levels of military damage and degradation of the general air defense and military capabilities in Israel and the Gulf are going to be accumulating from drone attacks. At least that's my best guess. But as the situation further deteriorates for Israel and the West, the question of whether a nuclear response might eventually come up, particularly on the part of the Israelis, who may eventually get to a point where they begin to see their survival as a state under threat. And I think that could occur. I think the Israelis are now suffering, I would call it serious damage, but not existential. I mean, the society is rich, it's robust, it has many, it has been under attack many times, so it has developed many passive defense capabilities that will help keep deaths down. The total weight of munitions that can be delivered by Iran is much lower than what has so far been delivered to Iran. Over time, it may change. That may change. And so the situation is bad and should be getting people's attention, but it's not necessarily existential, at least as far as I can tell. Enough that anybody with common sense would be talking about stopping this. But we're not dealing with people who are showing much common sense. So that's my concern. Now, I sat down and said to myself, what could Iranian military planners be thinking about with regard to retaliating against an Israeli nuclear strike on Iran? Because I do not believe, nothing is predictable, but I do not believe that Iran would strike with nuclear weapons against Israel first. I think the Iranians are very sensible. They've had enough, and I don't blame them. And they want this thing ended. And they want all these attacks on them and this constant attempt to crush them to end. And they're going to follow this through, no question. And no question from my point of view. So at some point, things are going to get really hairy because the Israeli government is led by messianic lunatics. We have a gangster sociopath in charge of the American government. He may be showing signs of dementia. I can't tell because this guy is so nuts that it's hard for me to tell. He's not surrounded by many people who are responsible, although I think there are some people who are there who they're not very admirable people, but they know better. I think this guy J.D. Vance is not crazy. He's without any ethical standards of any kind, but that's different from being crazy and suicidal for the country. And I think he may eventually play a constructive role if he's in a position to do so. If it doesn't cost them any, it's like a lot of these people, I like to describe them, they'll do the right thing if it doesn't cost them anything. So he's in that category. He surrounded Tulsi Gabbard, although she's made very bad judgments in my view. I think she understands the situation. I do think she's very smart. And I do think she's going to stick to her guns with regard to telling the truth. I think she's hurt herself badly, but that's a different discussion. But I do think she knows what she's doing, and she's going to speak the truth to this lunatic. And she's going to have some support, I think. I'm hopeful from someone like Vance. I mean, she's not going to be totally out in left field as she has been. So I'm praying that some form of rationality will possibly play a role in the future. But this Netanyahu is a man who I just don't know how to establish boundaries for him. And he's surrounded by these messianic religious lunatics who they remind me.
But he's becoming an AI character recently because mostly he's hiding somewhere because he's not out that much.
It's like this. I think I told you this joke of this Israeli friend of mine where I said to him, he was dragging me to this wailing wall, and I said, Reuven, I feel like we're going back 5,000 years. And Reuven says to me, oh, no, much further. and that's the way I feel about these people. They're crazy. 5,000 years is not enough time to go back describing them. Anyway, so hopefully the forces of rationality, which do exist in Israel. I mean, I know many people who are quite rational. They're not in control. But I'm hopeful that some people within the society who have rational and deep understanding of how dangerous this situation is will eventually begin to influence the situation. I don't know. I'm just hoping. But if my objective in the discussion to follow is to explain to people that Israel, and I'm explaining to everybody, I'm explaining this to Americans, Western Europeans, Israelis. I want Israelis to know this. I want the average Iranian to know this. I want the Gulf state leaders to know this, that a nuclear attack on Iran will almost certainly be answered by an attack on Israel, on a nuclear attack on Israel. Iran has the capacity to do this. They may not be a nuclear weapon state now, but if they are hit, they can sit in those tunnels because they can't close the country down. With even tens or dozens of nuclear weapons on Iran will not end Iran as a functioning, diversified state. Its underground facilities will continue to function, and they will be able to take that 408 kilograms of uranium hexafluoride they now have and convert them to 10 or 11 atomic bombs. Now, those atomic bombs are different from the modern weapons that I have talked about in the past. The modern weapons I've talked about tend to be thermonuclear weapons, much higher yields. They're the kinds of weapons that the United States and Russia deploy, China now. These are much lower yield bombs, but people should make no mistake. They are as deadly or more deadly than the more higher yield weapons because you can use them efficiently. And I sat down and I asked myself, if I were, and I have worked on nuclear weapon attack planning, maybe I should be tried as a war criminal sometime in the future. But when I was in the Pentagon, I looked at war plans, detailed, real war plans, and looked at the ground zeros, and looked looked at matters of optimizing those attacks. And what do I mean when I say optimizing those attacks? Those attacks were technically, carefully optimized to do the most damage you can do with the available destructive capability. Okay? That's what optimization means when you talk about optimizing a nuclear attack. You're talking about optimizing death and destruction, maximizing death and destruction. So if you're a military planner in Iran and your country has been attacked and you have one group of people fabricating the weapons and another group planning how to use them, well, let me show you how they might use them. And let me tell you, might is a weak statement, because I think this is a prediction. I think this is certainly what could happen among many other kinds of things that could happen. And one of the things to do would be to go after Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is the big population center. It's a large area target. It's a very dense target. It's the economic and population center for Israel. There are other, of course, important centers. But this is the one place you would certainly attack among others. So I sat down and said, what would happen if I took 3 of my 10 or 11 atomic bombs? These are the things that are no more damaging than what destroyed Hiroshima in 1945. And I laid them down in a pattern on the most densely populated areas of Tel Aviv. Now, I lay them down with a deep understanding of the nuclear weapons effects. I don't sit around doing stupid things like thinking about blast alone. There's going to be blast, there's going to be nuclear radiation, and there's going to be firestorms that are produced by these weapons. And the firestorms, if I space the weapons out, can propagate and coalesce to make larger areas of fire than I could get with the individual weapons. And so I would space them accordingly. So let's look at slide 1.
Yeah.
Okay, this slide shows you 3 10 to 15 kiloton low yield atomic weapons. So these are different. They're fundamentally similar, but the physical effects express themselves in a different manner. First of all, what I've shown in the middle is I put little icons for the fireballs. So to remind your audience, the nuclear weapon detonates. In this case, these are low yield nuclear weapons. So the fireballs are balls of superheated air, which are about 1% the density of air, because the nuclear weapon is very hot. In this particular case, the interior of the nuclear weapon is about 10 or 15 million degrees Kelvin. Thermonuclear weapon might be 100 million degrees Kelvin. So it's a lot hotter. But 10 million degrees is plenty hot. And what that fireball is a region of superheated atmosphere that has been heated to a temperature. This is at the maximum. It's forming a bubble in the air. It's maybe a few hundred meters, a fraction of a kilometer in diameter. So it's not miles in diameter. Its surface temperature is about 7,000 or 8,000 degrees Kelvin, which is a couple of thousand degrees hotter than the surface of the sun. And that yellow area below is the area on the ground where fires will be set. So this is showing you the rough area. Notice there are areas in between where the fireballs will not necessarily be bright enough to set buildings and outside trees on fire. They're open areas. And that's intentional. I've spread this thing out intentionally far enough so this occurs. Now, something different that occurs with the lower yield nuclear weapons that you don't experience with the higher yield nuclear weapons is what's called the prompt nuclear radiation from the radioactive products that underwent this nuclear disintegration to to release all this energy. So you had uranium-235 and these are uranium weapons. We're not talking plutonium. They break up, and they break up into strontium and cobalt and xenon and all kinds of tinier nuclear fragments. Those fragments are very close together when the nucleus disintegrates. The electric field is very strong and long and blows them apart, and they give up and they create and they release a tremendous amount of kinetic and electromagnetic energy. The kinetic energy is small relative to the light and heat because when the temperature is so high, most of the energy is in light and heat, not physical expansion. So, but these materials are undergoing nuclear reactions too, independent of the fact that they're creating a very hot ball of air. They're giving off nuclear radiation. Now, normally with a very high yield weapon, you would, if you were in a region where this nuclear radiation was very strong, you'd already be dead from the effects of blast and heat because the higher yield would create so much blast and heat relative to the nuclear radiation that it wouldn't matter that there was this nuclear radiation. But with these lower yield weapons, you're going to have nuclear radiation that you could experience relative to the blast and yield. I'll describe that shortly, but you have what's called, and this is sometimes called prompt radiation. So the fireball is radiating light and heat. There's a blast wave projecting out from it, and at the same time, gamma rays and neutrons from these nuclear radiations from the disintegrating nuclear material. And if you're in close enough where you might imagine, surviving for some short interval of time from blast and heat, you could still get enough prompt radiation to kill you.